right. Welcome to yet another episode of the Clutch Burners podcast with right over there, the Canadian Chuck Norris. That would be Richard Guido.
And the guy who smells like burnt rubber today, Bill Armstrong.
That's right. I did, in fact, go to the track first time this season. And yeah, I learned a whole bunch. And I want to thank Tom and Blaine Stark for coming because my head hurts. I learned so much from Tom today. And we can talk more about that later. But yeah, I learned a ton as far as tire pressure stuff, like all these things you think a guy would know. But shock tuning especially, that made a huge difference. And the track was not good today. I had goals to try the radials today, and we didn't get there because the track wasn't very good. But
focus, Bill. Great. Who else is with us?
And I made it home. Oh, our guest today with that killer picture of him launching his 56 Chevy stick car, we have Mr. Andy Starr with us today. Andy, say hello.
Hey guys, and thanks so much for having me. I'm totally honored to be on the Clutch Burners podcast. This is so exciting. You have no idea. So thank you for having me.
We're super excited to have you on here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, you have some history in the industry that, I mean, I'll tell a story about how you helped the tune on my car. And like, I didn't even know you. You were like, hey man, your car, it starts a little hard. Can I take a look? And I was just telling Travis before this, like literally every single time I start my car, I'm like, dude, Andy is amazing. Cause it starts like a new car now. It's awesome. Yeah. And it was like a few keystrokes. So tell people who you are, kind of your background and what you're doing now, and about that awesome car behind you too.
Yeah, so I'm Andy Starr. I own Starr Performance and Consulting. I've been a stick shift racer my whole entire life, and that is just a lifelong exercise in perseverance and learning how to do stick shifts. Oh my gosh, yeah, sure. And I really got my start in high performance aftermarket, working for Hilborn Fuel Injection, doing their EFI program, and I did that for a bunch of years, from 06 to about 3.5 years ago, when they were bought by Holley. And then I was a Holley Motorsports manager, working with race shops and tuners, helping them with their issues with the Holley product. And I finally decided, after Holley had a restructuring, that it was time to do my own thing and go out and show my wares. And it's just been a fantastic trip since July of last year. But it's very, very exciting to continue to grow. And this is a very exciting opportunity for me to talk about my stick shift career with you guys. It's long and storied, and we'll, share some of the highs and lows of stick shift racing throughout the years.
Well, I want to hear more about it, because your car is like pulling a wheel stand, and mine never does that. So you've got something figured out, right?
It's really interesting. So this is a picture from Drag Week when I had my smaller motor in it. It was a bow tie block, was 565 inches.
Well, that's the smaller motor.
That's the smaller motor, right? Yeah,
perfect.
But that was a true pump gas deal. It was 9.5 to 1. We were going 10 flat, 1020s with that car. And it used to yank the front tires like a champ. I mean, it was awesome. Someone posted not too long on Facebook with this thing dragging a bumper at Maple Grove a bunch of years ago. And ever since I put the big motor in it and changed around the weight in the front of the car, that car has struggled to wheel stand.
And what does it weigh?
So that's a really good question. We actually just got done scaling the car. So the car, before we started scaling and putting weight on it, was just about 3,900 pounds. So it's not Rich Guido weight, but it sure is a tank. It's
you're in good company here.
Yes, absolutely. But we scaled the car, and the whole idea was to try and get the car, I guess side to side right, and try to get the front to rear bias. So we put some weight in the car. It's now 4,100 pounds with me in it. But now we have some weight distribution. The car feels completely different. And I'm interested to see if the time that we spent trying to get the car to even out and level out will make a difference in getting the car to work better. And one of the other things too I decided to do was get rid of the small tire. Everybody's going to the smaller tire, and even a drag tire. Like I know Frank Romano was working with it at Sick Week, and I take my hat off to that guy. He is really both feet first into the whole dynamic of tire and clutch. But I'm gonna go back old school. I'm putting the big 3315 that I built the car around back on it, and put the weight in the car. And I'm looking forward to some exciting happenings here coming up shortly at the racetrack with the car.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the whole combo? So it's what year the car is, the motor, the trans, the clutch, and the rear end tire size.
Yeah, so that car has the 56 has really been a work in progress for the past 30 years. So currently I designed and built a 582 Ford, so 13-to-1 motor. And all the stuff I've learned at Drag Week before about putting larger cam cores in it, larger lifters, spring oilers, learning that we could put more compression in these motors. I mean, I thought I was pushing the edge at 13-to-1. Here, come to find out, that's not even the beginning of pushing the edge with pump gas with these things. I actually drive around with that car now with 36 degrees of lead with pump gas. It's amazing. But so the motor
is amazing. Yes.
Yeah, it really is. The technology with the camshafts and the coolant. I spent a lot of time on designing the cooling system, so that way we can run the timing that we're running and keep it cool. So on the dyno over the injection connection, it made 935 horsepower to the rear tires and just shy of 800 foot-pounds to the rear tires. And I mean, just shy by like 2 foot-pounds. So it's a brute.
All NA.
All NA, absolutely, yeah. And I credit that to two things. I credit that to the Hilborn injection system, the IR manifold, which creates torque. And the thing at 4,600 RPM is making almost 800 foot-pounds, and it goes right up to just about 6,000 with the torque. So big, heavy cars need torque, just like, you guys are doing with, the power adder. You're putting torque to the motor. So that's a really stout combination. I have a heavily modified Ace clutch. It's a Power Force clutch, and it's got twin 5135 discs in it. Still a diaphragm hat and what have you. Oh yeah, the thing drives killer.
Yes.
And back in the day, we had these huge, pressure plates on it. 2,800, 3,200 pounds. You could drive it for a block and park the thing. You're 25 years old and you're like, I don't want to drive this stupid thing anymore. It hurts. Don't want that anymore. So we put the diaphragm in it, and we had to put a good disc in it to get it to slip and to survive, and that worked out really well. So stick shift, I think probably the best transmission on the whole entire planet, the GF5R from G-Force. That thing is just amazing. And I've had that transmission since 09, and I have beat that thing and put it away wet. I can't tell you how many times, and it has always come back and worked flawlessly. And quite frankly, that transmission is so good that it makes guys like me that can't shift look like pro stock racers. It is just that good. So, and I also have to say, and just throwing a stick shift on a car on a bell housing is not anything you can do it at a level at this level. So spending time degrading the bell housing, getting the bell housing parallel to the back of the block. These are all basic things, and a lot of that, especially the parallelism on the back of the block, I owe to my mentor in the stick shift world of Jody Haig of Jody's Transmissions. And he's like, Andy, he says, concentricity is key, but if you're not checking for out a parallel, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And he wasn't kidding. This thing really does shift like butter when you dial in the bell housing away. But anyhow,
quick question. So I'm not super familiar with that transmission, but that has it's a 5-speed with the long style shifter. Is that correct?
Sure. Yes. So this is the long vertigate shifter on it. Yes, absolutely. What a great shifter. The pistol grip. I used the T handle for years. And that's what I grew up with, the T-handle. And then one day I was like, you know what, I'll have to try the pistol grip. And I did, and I'll never look back. That is so comfortable to shift. And if you've ever seen those videos of Erica Enders in her car when she's shifting that thing with that pistol grip right next to her, it looks like she's literally like in her Cadillac, just rowing down rowing down the road. It's amazing. And you're not kidding. It really is just that easy with that stick shift. So I'm telling you, if I can drive a stick shift car, anybody can drive a stick shift car with the right equipment. So, I mean, it really does make it for a fun thing. We're using all 5 gears too. I mean, I go through traps in 5th gear at 7,200 RPM.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. We are shifting all 5 gears, so a lot of the stuff's overdrive. This is 1-to-1 in 5th gear.
And you have a pretty big tire, pretty tall tire. So that ring and pinion was like 456 or something?
Yeah, it's a 56. Yeah. You know, I was
Nice.
thinking about putting a 488 in it this year, but I'm making a lot of changes and I don't want to change and upset the whole apple cart too much. I'd like to go through just a little bit higher. So 71, 7,200, I think is not there yet. I think it's 7,600 should probably where I should be with that combination.
Oh yeah, big motor, like just rip it right to the moon. I love
Yeah,
that.
right. Well, that's really not to the moon, but it's
No, it's not.
moon for me.
It's more than I spin mine, so I'm
Yep.
like, ooh, that's high. But yeah, that's
What's the
awesome.
bore and stroke?
So it's 4,600 by 4-inch 375.
Yeah.
So it's 582 inches and a short deck combination, 55 millimeter cam, 937 Crowler lifter. You know, I did everything I could
Nice.
to try and keep the drivetrain or valve train. These things are all about valve train. You know, start doing the NA stuff. The NA stuff is such a different world because, you know, we're doing everything we can to maximize performance within the available, you know, atmospheric pressure that we have, and it's all about cramming in the cylinder as best we can. That's really one of the nice things I like about the IR. It's crazy how well that stuff works. So
do you have a gear vendor on it?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. I'm doing something a little different this year where my old street tire was 33 inches high and I'm putting a 35-inch tall tire on it. And I'm taking a nod from some of the guys like Brian Robbins and you know, Bryant with the Javelin. You know, they run a tall Dixie Peck tire. So I'm going to put a 35-inch tall tire on it. And doing the math, I should get around 72 mile an hour at 3,200 RPM. And I'll run this motor at 3,200 RPM. It's as smooth as butter for hours.
And with that big tall truck tire, you go right through the mud, no problem.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, you know, if you guys were down in Atlanta, right, when they had that hurricane coming in, holy smokes! I wish I had mud tires back then. You should have seen some of the stuff we were driving through. But, it was crazy. Yeah. So so it will make it an all-terrain vehicle if need be. So
perfect.
And what was the first year you did drag week?
2016.
Okay.
2016 was my first year. Yeah, you know, and the infamous story is I was working PRI at the Hilborn booth, and I had made friends with Glenn Hunter years ago. I had sold him some parts when he was still running the supercharger on his 56. And he's like, oh, come on, man, you got to do drag week. Come on, man, you got to do it. I'm like, oh, man, I know I want to do it. I've been dying to do it. And I finally committed to him there. You know, it's kind of like, you know, that last moment, I'm going to go. And then I went home and I told my wife, I'm going to drag week. She's like, okay. So, you know, but yeah, I mean, Glenn had goaded me for a long time to go to drag week, and I finally succumbed to the pressure and finally went. Yeah. So that was my first one. And I never looked back. It was an absolutely amazing experience. And actually all the drag and drive stuff is amazing experience. I've done the stuff at Sick Week. I've done the stuff at Midwest Drags. And I mean, it's all the same type of exciting camaraderie that just can't be matched anywhere. And so it really is a passion. Now, some of the guys are, you know, able to go a lot more than I am, and they are very, very passionate. But man, when I get there, it's I call it adrenaline from Monday morning till Friday night, and then you need to catch up. Yeah.
So I sorry, Rich, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So I am curious about the clutch. You said it's an old A style, but it's a diaphragm clutch.
Yeah.
And you run 251/35 discs in it.
Yeah, I sure do. And, you know, we talk about perseverance. We talk about trying stuff. So this has got a billet hat on it, and it has 3 little fingers on it for weight. And they actually do work. You take those off, and that thing will literally drive right through the clutch every time. So these little weights do work.
So it's almost a combination then.
Yeah, we'll call it a hybrid, but not really not as adjustable as an adjustable clutch, because obviously you can't adjust hat pressure. You can if you wanted to shim it, and they actually have different diaphragms. But really, I think you have some adjustabilities in these 3 little weights that they have.
Okay.
So I say, you know what, I'm going to be slick here. I'm going to pretend this is a racing clutch. So I took one of these sets of fingers, and I drilled little holes in them, and I did a little math in my head, and I said, you know what, I need to add about 13 grams of weight out there
per finger.
Per finger. Now keep in mind that the weight isn't in the center, you know, towards the center where you have it for a regular, you know, off the lever, off of a regular slipper clutch. This is all the way in the outside. So you take 13 grams and you multiply it by like 10,000, and that's what the weight is. So the first time, so the first time I let the clutch go at 7,200 and the burnout, it literally stripped all the weight off the outside of that clutch. I mean, it ripped everything apart. It got into the bell housing. There was smoke, fire, and brimstone stuff shooting out of the bell housing. And I'm like, what happened? Well, that was my first real experience of how different the weight is as you start to place it, outside. Now, I had no idea it was going to magnify it that much.
So if I understand this correctly, then you're actually placing the weight after the pivot on the OD, the outside diameter of the flywheel.
Well, yeah, basically
the lever action. You have the lever action multiplying that weight.
Yeah,
correct?
that's exactly right. So that the weight is actually all the way outside on the outer part of the diaphragm head assembly,
where it has the largest moment of inertia. Am I right in that terminology?
Valuable lesson.
Wow.
Valuable lesson. Broken parts everywhere. But you got to fail to learn, and that was a really, really interesting learning experience. And so that was fun. But I, like I said, went from the rag and I went to the Cinderdyne disc. Was the best thing I ever did. It's a little bit noisy, a little bit cantankerous, but man, when it's time to road a thing down the racetrack, it works really, really, really well.
And recovers nice. Recovers nice too, right? Like,
and it kind of does. It doesn't recover real nice like a slipper clutch. Where you get that little bit of slip down low, but it certainly wasn't as bad as the rag where it was instant on, and that was just brutal. That broke parts just as much as leaving the line. So,
are you using the clutch to shift?
I am. Yeah, I sure am. Now I tried. I really did. I had Leonard Long. He was giving me direction, and we were talking about first gears, and they made them so that way there was no bevel to hold the first gear in and what have you. And so it's called a zero face. We zero faced it, and I'm telling you, 2 hands, I cannot pull that thing out of first gear without a clutch. It just will not happen. All the weight and all the torque, it's done. It's just, so I do use the pedal to shift the car.
And is that an all mechanical setup, hydraulic? What do you have?
Yeah, it's a hydraulic. I bought this McLeod setup. Oh gosh, let's see here. When did I put the big block in? It 1996. 1996. I've had a hydraulic release in the car.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
So
I was in college in 96 and my car was sitting in storage.
Man, I was almost ready to get married. I was putting a big block in the car and living life large, So
that's
awesome.
That
was a long time ago. I mean, I've had this car now for over 30 years.
That's awesome.
So it's become a part of me. It's become something that's defined me. It was the car that got me my job at Hilborn Fuel Injection. So I mean, it's not going anywhere. I'm married to it at this point. So
nice.
Let's talk about your starting line procedure. So what gear do you do your burnout in?
It really depends. And here's the real quickly. This you guys might find this a funny story. So anyhow, when it was a small block car, I had bought a Kevlar disc from McLeod Racing, and I'm out there doing burnouts with it. And I get in the third burnout, and I knocked the disc out of the car. I mean, smoked it. And I called up Red Roberts, and I said, hey, I got a problem here. I smoked the clutch. He goes, how'd you smoke the clutch? And I said, I was doing a burnout. He says, obviously, son, you have no idea what you're doing. But he said in a nice fatherly way. He says, let me show you and tell you how to do a burnout with a stick shift car. And those are lessons you never forget. So depending on how I feel on the size of the tire, I either do it in third or fourth gear.
Oh, wow.
Third or fourth gear, absolutely, to get wheel speed out of it. And it goes right on the limiter, right around 7,600, and I let the clutch go, and it's got to snap the tire, and then I'll just run it through that gear depending on how I feel. So,
wow, yeah, I think about Tom Stark telling us he does fourth gear burnouts, and here me and Rich there's a second gear. I don't know, 60-mile-an-hour wheel speed. Like, I feel pretty good about that, but clearly that is inadequate as hell.
So you're right. I noticed that in second gear, there's not enough wheel speed. So I'm like, okay, here we go. So third gear, and then I finally got the kahunas up to try it in fourth gear, and that worked out awesome. So, but yeah, the key there is you just right to the moon and let the clutch rip. Don't pussyfoot around, man. Let that thing go, and it'll come right up. And if it does, you're in good shape.
Yikes. And that and then you'll probably I mean, I'm guessing with that wheel speed, you pretty much have to go through and then back up, or can you get it stopped before that?
I don't go through. There's a lot of different ways that people look at doing burnouts. I'm of the school of thought of, I don't want to shock the drivetrain, so I try not to chirp the tire coming out of the burnout. I'll actually roll out of the burnout, jam the clutch in, get out of the throttle at the same time, and just roll forward up to the line. So if you catch me chirping a tire as I'm coming out of burnout, I've not done it correctly, in my opinion. So I try to take it easy on the drivetrain by not chirping a tire, and it seems to work. So far, so good.
So you're snapping the throttle and the clutch at the same time, just snapping the throttle close and hitting the clutch.
Yep, right, exactly. Pretty much the same time, exactly. So I just kind of roll up. I just roll right up and I roll right to the line, put it in first gear. And with these transmissions, especially like if you're searching for third gear or fourth gear, if you don't let the clutch out and let it find the gear, you could be halfway into gear. And if you let the clutch out, you've just knocked a gear set out of that transmission, because the dog rings haven't engaged. So I'll roll up, and as I'm rolling up, I'll squeeze the lever and I'll put it up in the first gear and let it positively engage before I put it into the stage beam. So, and I've never heard a transmission. And you can see it sometimes in some of the class racers. They'll be banging things around as they're trying to let the clutch out, and it's because they don't have it in gear all the way.
That's it's pretty interesting. It's amazing the things that you do and you forget to talk about. But I'm the same. Like, even when I when I go to do my second gear burnout, like as I'm coasting up there, I'll make sure it's in second gear before I do my burnout, because if I try to put it in and it's like half in, you're gonna wreck something.
You absolutely positively are. Absolutely. And that's all part of the technique you learn. You do it so many times, now it becomes second nature,
Yeah, and I'll say too, I guess, because Rich and I's transmission is face plated in first through fourth.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed too on the street, when I'm coming up to a stop, before I stop, it slides right into first gear. Yep. If you stop and try and do it, it either bangs or it doesn't quite go. You got to fiddle with the clutch a little bit. If you do it as you're rolling up, it just goes right in, doesn't make any noise.
Everybody's like, how do you drive that thing on the street? I was like, well, if you've ever driven a truck, you can drive this transmission on the street. So,
yes, it sounds. I always will say, if you don't shift them right, it sounds just like a broken dump truck. It's awesome.
Oh my gosh, it's terrible. and the worst thing with these transmissions, I guess you guys are synchroed in fifth
and sixth.
Yep, you're synchroned. Okay. Fifth and sixth.
And reverse.
Well, this thing makes noise in every gear. And the interesting thing about this is when you're driving down the road and you're in fifth gear and you come up to an intersection, and you can see the light turn red, and you click the thing in neutral and you start cruising down, you're doing 45, 50 mile an hour and the light turns green. It's the scariest thing you'll ever do. So, because the thing doesn't have any synchronous in fifth gear. So you push the clutch in and you grab the handle. All right. And then you jam that thing with everything you've got in the fifth gear and hope it doesn't come unglued, because it bangs like someone is beating it with a hammer. Boom! And the first couple of times you do that, it's just absolutely unnerving. I mean, like, it's coming apart. But those are some of the things that you have to do with some of these faceplate transmissions in order to drive them. Like you said, like going around a turn, I get halfway around the turn and you just click it right in the second gear like butter, and you drive around the turn and you accelerate out. And you have to learn how to do that. And with a vertigate shifter, so if you like you're driving down the road and you do have to change a gear, you want to go from first to third, you have to actually actuate it into the second and then lightly move it up in the third in order for it to gauge, because it's a vertigate shifter. You can't find an H pattern, so you have to find the H pattern with the handle. And that took me about a year and a half to figure out, to get that just right. But I can drive this transmission like it's a regular transmission, put any gear you want at any time, because of learning how to drive it like a truck. It's basically a truck trans, and at that point.
Nice. I can't say I've ever driven one of those.
No, I want to back you up though. I got two questions already. You're gonna make me. We're gonna have some fun. Let's go back to the burnout. So, talk to us a little bit about why you don't want to chirp the tires, because, I'll just let you describe it, because obviously you know what you're doing. I'm just.
So that's an instant load and instant shock in the drivetrain. And why beat the car up in the burnout? The burnout's to condition to prepare the car for the race. You know, I'm going to do all kinds of awful things to it by the time I get the car staged. Why give it another reason to hate me before I get there? And that's all. So it's just, you know, and it's just, it's discipline. It's kind of like driving this motor with a pump gas in it, with 13-to-1. You know, you can't be beating on this car with the pump gas in it. You're going to dramatically shorten its life. So I've learned to become disciplined with the car and drive it for the purpose that it's made for. And that's how I look at it. There's no sense in beating it up. I'm looking for longevity.
Okay, so when you say chirp tires, so when I do a burnout, I will, and it was funny. I remember my buddy going, "You see this thing attached to the side of your car here? That's a mirror. It's for looking at the smoke coming off your tire." And I'm like, "All right." He's like, "You're not getting any smoke," and he's like, "How?" Anyways, so when I do a burnout, yeah, as soon as it starts to pull a motor down is typically when I push in the clutch. Is that what you're describing too?
Yes, you can feel it. Okay. Right. You can start to feel the tire. And I don't even know why you're asking me. Where's Frank Romano? I mean, he is the burnout master, you know, so I hope to one day do a burnout as good as Frank Romano. But the long and short of it is that, yeah, you know, it's all about the wheel speed, and Frank gets great wheel speed. So I'm thinking you guys are going to be trying third gear burnouts here the next time you go out.
Maybe.
Not with my radial, right. I'm not. I don't think it needs it. So
yeah, you're right. The radial's a different animal, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
A little short and sweet. Yeah.
And so my second question was, so when you're going from fourth to fifth, you can pull it into neutral between gears?
You're talking about just driving it down the road or racing? Or...
Yeah, no, driving down the road.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sure, absolutely. Okay. And that's really interesting. That's actually the valid point. So when you shift it into neutral and you come across the light, maybe you're slowing down, you're doing 25 miles an hour, you can't stop to put it in first gear. You're going too fast to try and put it in that gear, first or second gear. So you've got to bring it up to first gear to reset the vertigate, and then you got to lightly work it through the gears to put it in third gear to continue going. So yeah, you can push it in neutral, but it's finding the correct gear from there. And it's just knowing where the gates are in order to get it into that gear. So it's seamless at this point, but otherwise you're stuck. You know, you put it in fifth gear and you lug it out, but now I've figured out how to vertigate it. So it's all good.
So does double clutching work at all with that transmission?
You know what, Rich? I might have to try that. I've never done that ever.
Yeah. So the way I drive mine on the street is, I'm in first gear, start going, I pull it into neutral, I let the clutch out, get everything to align, and then I push the clutch back in, and then I pull it into gear, and it's the difference between, it's amazing.
That is a great idea. And you know what? For a guy that keeps talking about driving a truck trans, you can tell I've never driven a truck. Because I think that's a popular way to drive a truck, right? You double clutch it. Anyhow, so no, I've never tried that, but that's a great tip. I'm going to try that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. Like with the vertigate, I just wasn't sure if you could do that or not. But as long as there's neutral between the gears, you should be able to do that. And yeah,
absolutely.
I've been with friends who are driving their faceplated transmission, and they're in neutral, and then it's like, it's a bit of a shit show at that point.
It is.
Oh no! What should they just jam it in? Yeah,
that's right. Everybody, hold on. It's going to get exciting in about a half a second.
Right. It's like,
okay, so you've done a burnout. You're rolling up. Do you use a brake pressure gauge or anything to stage, or you just pretty much roll into this? Well, I guess NA you don't have to. You just bump it in. Where's your line lock button?
It's actually on the side of the shifter, just like old school, on the side of the shifter. It's still an old Hurst roll control. I'm telling you, this car is old as dirt. I mean, the stuff that's on this car, I mean, it's the stuff from 1980s. I mean, other than a big tire, I could probably put a rear leaf spring on and shackles, and I'd be back in 1965 again with half the stuff that's on this car. Yeah, so it's on the side of the shifter. Yep.
Sweet.
So
and then launching, what RPM do you typically launch at? Or you vary that depending on track too?
I really do. And you know what? Back to perseverance again. You know, I've been trying to find this car since I put the big motor in it, and it's been I used to launch the car at 4,800, 5,200 with the other motor. Today, if I really want the car to work right now, before I scaled it, 36 to 3,800. That is it. That's all that car will take and work. Yeah.
Huh. And then the clutch is slipping for you?
Yeah, sure is. You can see it in the graph. you know, if I get it just right and it slips, I could probably put more power to it, but it's about consistency in the clutch and consistency in the driver at that point. And so I'm still trying to find that sweet spot is what it comes down to.
How long does it slip for?
So it depends
on a good pass.
It depends. I don't know if I could tell you in a time, but I can tell you in how it works. You know what I'm saying? So when I'm looking at Driveshaft, really is what I'm looking at too. But you can see, you could see the graph and the RPM, and the whole idea is I'm trying to get the two to slip to a certain point, right? I don't want the two to match right away. I want them to kind of join as I'm coming up in the gear. So I don't know, 0.2 of a second tops. If that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
It's not a whole lot. It's not a whole lot. And I think you know, looking at some other graphs with some radial stuff, they're slipping them really hard to try and get the cars to work.
Rich, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. Because you're slipping 0.75 of a second to a second.
Yeah, this actually since I switched to radials and when I went to Florida there, that thing was slipping 1.4 seconds.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
But, I mean, but you need to do that, right? Because you can't recover with that radial. So you got to take the hit out of it somehow.
Yeah.
How do you take it out? I mean, obviously the clutch is the first line of defense there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
and what about timing? Do you play with timing at all on launch?
So yes, I've been playing with timing, taking out timing to try and calm it down. I've had as much as 16 degrees out of that thing to try and get it to work. But it's just like anything else. The more timing I pull out of it, the slower the car is. So I'd love to be able to put the timing back in it. And hence the reason going back to the big tire. You know, I'm tired of spinning my wheels, if you say, with the smaller tire. So I've got it. Let's use it. You know, I mean, there's some romanticism with the small tire, but I built it as a big tire car back in 1995. And I think I'm going to go back to that ideology and let the tire work a little bit more. And I've switched tire brands. I've done a whole bunch of things to try and get the car to work this year.
Do you have a favorite, and do you run, well, do they make a stiff wall on anything but the 28-10-5?
Yeah, they do. And, you know, Mickey Thompson was my go-to tire brand for years. And right now they don't have anything for us in a big tire, unless you have a 16-inch rim. I don't have a 16-inch rim. So, you know, it's really funny looking at the newest Hot Rod magazine. They had an expose on the Hemi cars, the super stock AH cars.
I saw that. That was awesome. Right up. Yeah.
Really, I mean, and, you know, we all talk about, oh, you probably go fast with an automatic. Well, yeah, in my case, I probably would. But these cars are so scienced out. The fastest cars in the class were stick shift. And, you know, take a nod from them. They're big, heavy cars with lots of power. They're all running Goodyear tires. So I put Goodyears on the car this year, a stiff sidewall. Got a recommendation from one of their distributors, and we're going to give that a shot. No tubes, getting rid of the tubes to get rid of all that reciprocating mass. And we're going to try and let this tire eat and do what it needs to do.
And how much pressure are you running those?
I'm going to have to start from scratch. I don't know where to start with these tires, to be honest with you. But my 3111.5s, I was down at 9.25 pounds.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, it is interesting, the different challenges that we all have. I mean, you're an NA super heavy car and you run a big tire. You built it for a big tire. I think that's cool. I'm a big heavy car on a small tire.
Yep.
Yeah, we all have different challenges, and I'm just amazed at the amount of different ways that the stick guys get creative and figure this stuff
absolutely.
out.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me about your clutch the first time, and I was, well, when did I think I met you in 2016. And I was like, man, that sounds wild. I can't even visualize what that was. I was running just an off the shelf clutch at that point, and that's pretty cool. You know,
and the whole drag, let's face it, the whole drag and drive thing, it's all about time management too. And you know, if all the things I have to do, including playing with the clutch, there's probably, like I said, there's ET there in that clutch, but it is a lot of work to set up a clutch at the racetrack. And you know, and you could still find, you know, the spot where you're at, but really it's not the exact same spot you were at. All right. So a lot of those things change, especially with the base pressure. And unless you're running no base pressure, you just back it all the way off or whatever, or you have it full tight, who knows? You know, that's real simple, but finding that happy medium to try and get consistency out of it, I think is going to be a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the best 60-foot you've run in that car?
132.
Is it consistently in the 1.3s?
It's not. It's consistency in the high 1.3s though. So 136, 138.
That's pretty good. That's
not
pretty
so
good.
bad. I'm looking
Not
for some
so bad.
20s this year. My goal is some 20s this year.
Damn.
So.
My goal is the 130s this year.
Oh, is it?
The 130s.
Yeah, we do a bunch of our work at the back end of the track.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
true.
I don't have that luxury, baby. It's first 30s to killer. And it's the hardest part of the car. After you hit second gear, it's a walk in the park, you know,
Yep.
but getting to second gear sometimes. And I look at my graphs, you know, and I'm in first gear for up to a second and 8/10 in some cases. I mean, I'm in first gear forever. You know, and I go back to looking at graphs with Leonard Long, you know, and I forget what podcast it was. You guys were talking about shifting times, I guess, you know, first gear.
Yep.
And we've got, you know, some of these NA cars in 7/10 of a second, they're pulling the lever. 7/10 of a second, they're in second gear. And I'm like, let me see here. If I can shift at 7/10 of a second, that'd be 1.2 seconds, 1.1 seconds out of my ET. That'd put me smack right down in the bottom eights. Of course, that's never going to happen. But, you know, being in first gear and letting your RPM do this and do that and trying to figure out when you're going to shift slows these cars down dramatically. And that's all part of finding the sweet spot with it, you know. So
yeah, that is interesting. I know that, like you said, the amount of time reduced, especially on a boosted car, when you're off the power to make the shift, is significant. When, you know, years ago when I was kicking the clutch to shift, pretty much the fastest shift, and we've talked about this before, but the quickest shifts I could see was like a 0.225. That was like the fastest.
Okay. Yep.
And then they would just go downhill from there. And now with the clutchless shifting, it's typically about a 0.112. Wow. And I have seen on a 3.4, I've seen a 0.04. Like, it's ridiculous how fast it'll shift sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. That's got to help.
But what I've calculated in just going from kicking the clutch to clutchless shifting, I saved like 0.445 seconds of time where I was not off the power.
Yeah, no, and even that, and then of course the acceleration rate of the car itself. You've already stopped forward momentum. You know, there's something to be said for that. Maybe I should consider shifting without the clutch in other gears as opposed to first gear. You know, so I get into second gear and then start trying to route in second to third and third to fourth and fifth. You know,
maybe and Rich and I have a little bit different tactic that we do it, but it works. I mean, it works really, really well. And what's interesting too is when you look at a data log of when we were kicking the clutch and when we're not, there were these huge dips in boost when you kick the clutch. Oh, they would have to come back in. Now it's just a little boop boop. It's just a little burp. Right. So yeah,
that makes perfect sense. Yeah, that's a good idea. I might try that instead. I always learn something new from you guys. I love it.
Well, thanks. I'm flattered.
We just about never asked this question, but after drag week, I'm curious, are you running 1350 U-joints in your car? Or anything bigger?
I am, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm running too. I know that Steve Morris, Clark, Rosenthal, they were both running 1350, and yeah, they were not cutting it for those guys. So
what's the next step up from that? Is a 1430?
Yeah, it's something
I don't know. I really don't know.
It's out of a dump truck though, right? I mean, it's a dump truck U-joint.
It's probably a dump truck, yeah.
You know, and those guys are making so much power. I mean, it's berserk. You know, I mean, I got a lot of weight and I'm shocking the drivetrain, but actually I just put the drive shaft back in the car today and the U-joints are mint and they've been in that U-joint or that drive shaft. Oh gosh, it's got to be 6 years now. And
wow.
Yeah. What kind of drive shaft?
It's a 4-inch chrome moly Mark Williams deal.
Chrome moly.
Awesome. With all of his billet yoke and the whole 9 yards for the G-force. The G-force has a bearing output shaft. So it's got a special yoke for that. Yeah, I mean, it's killer. I mean, it's a beautiful piece. And, you know, I don't know if carbon fiber is ever going to be in my future with some of the stuff I've seen, you know, with the way they come apart and, you know, the mess that they are and how good this is. I just can't. These drive shafts are so good. There's no sense in messing with that.
Is your car a 4-link car?
What's that?
Is yours a 4-link in your car?
No, it's not. It's a ladder bar.
Oh, it's
Okay.
ladder bar. Oh yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And Rich,
Yes.
you have a chromoly drive shaft too, right?
Yeah, I have a I think it's a 3-inch.
Okay.
chromoly.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, and I've broken so much stuff. I call it the wall of shame. I've got transmission cases, rear ends, yokes, ring and pinion. I've got all this broken stuff, and I finally said, forget it. I'm going to put the best stuff I can buy and put it in the car and not have to worry about it. And so far, that plan B is working pretty good.
That sounds exactly like Frank Romano. That's exactly what he says, and I second that. You've got to have the best components in there.
You really do.
You're going to do this at this level. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a Dana 60 in the car for a couple of years. I cut it out of an F-250, the boneyard, narrowed it the whole 9 yards, put caps in and all this other stuff. And I had 40 spine gun dual axles in it. I thought the best components you can. And I broke 3 ring and pinions in 1 year. So I'm breaking all these ring and pinions, and a friend of mine gets me gets me in touch with a guy by the name of Steve Kluke. And he's a big stick shift guy. He races a Mopar, small block Mopar. It's an 8-second deal. And it's got a Lenco in it. So I get Steve on the phone. I was like, Steve, how do you get these? I mean, I'm out of my mind. I'm putting these rear ends in. I'm like, how do you keep your Dana 60 in your car alive? He goes, it's really simple. I was like, okay. He goes, after every third pass, you've got to shim the pinion gear. And I say, excuse me? Did you say after every third pass, you got to shim the pinion gear? He goes, absolutely. I was like, you're out of your mind. Who in their right mind is going to shim the pinion gear in a Dana 60? If you've never had one apart, you've got to spread the case. All the shims are underneath the bearings everywhere. So if you shim the pinion, you got to take the carrier bearings off and redo all that. I'm like, Steve, there's no way I'm doing that. He goes, we might as well get rid of the rear. It was the best advice I ever had.
And now I'm assuming it's a 9-inch.
Yeah, it sure is.
Nice.
And you pull out all the stops. This is a Moser M9. My buddy Kevin Tully, who's an amazing welder and fabricator, built this rear for me. And it's got a through bolt aluminum center section from Moser in it, a 456 and a 40 spline gun drilled axle. And quite frankly, I think 1 year I had to put axle bearings in it. I took the ring and pinion out of it, and that's been in the car now for close to 8 years. And I'm just starting to get an edge on the back side of the ring gear. I mean, I probably got another year left in this thing, and I'll replace it. But oh my gosh, I never had to shim a pinion gear ever again, And I mean, these components have been in the car for years and years and years, and knock on wood, that they don't break because they are just that good. And so I'm hoping to continue in that same vein of just, doing the maintenance to it and not have to touch them again.
So let's talk a little bit about your suspension, shocks, those types of things. Talk about what you already said it's a ladder bar setup.
Yep. So it's a ladder bar, and you know what? And so you've got the 10.5 racers or stick shift, in a Dart 10.5 class, slightly lighter cars, but one of the fastest cars right now, besides Leonard, was the guy that Ben works with, Ben Strader. That car's a ladder bar car. At least it was a couple years ago.
Huh.
And that thing's 60 foot's like nobody's business. So I know a ladder bar car can work. Maybe it's a little bit not as forgiving as a 4-link car. So I've modified the front end. I've got about 7.25 inches of front suspension travel to try and get the car to pitch rotate.
Nice.
So a lot of work to get that to happen, and that really did help the car. I mean, it really does work. So springs and shocks are key. I've got a Moroso front spring in it to try and get all the weight transfer. And Viking has really done a great job with the shocks. I work with Mike over there, and we've done some revalving. With the heavy weight of the car and hitting as hard as I do, I need more rebound control than your average automatic car. So he's helped me with revalving, and the car really seems to be liking what we're doing with the rear shock to try and control the rear end.
So what did you do to get so much front end travel out of that thing? Like, what is it stock?
So stock was about 3.25 inches, about 3.5.
You like doubled it.
Yeah, I doubled it. Yeah. So I used a 1-inch ball joint spacer and dropped it down. And then what happened is where off the chassis is a hump, if you will, right behind the ball joint that actually has your stop, your lower control arm stop. I had to cut that all out of the car. So I cut that out, allowed the ball joint to drop all the way, and then I put my own stop on the lower control arm instead. And that seems to be working. But yeah, to get that front end to droop as much as I wanted it to required a little bit of surgery, and it worked out really, really well for that particular application.
That's
So
awesome.
Bill, tell us what you learned today, because you were playing with shocks and chassis. And...
Yeah, so
yes, tell us.
So Tom Stark educated me a bit today. I don't have the luxury of so much travel front or rear. I have a Mustang 2 front end, which by their design, they're just limited to front end travel because it ends up hitting the shock as it extends.
Right.
But the front end hasn't been that big of a deal. But the rear end, so we were looking at video and it was crushing the tire. As a matter of fact, and even in this picture behind me, you can see that it's like, it looks super cool, but that's really bad.
Absolutely.
It's like balling up the tire, and it's just driving over it, and then it cups the tire, and then there's much less surface area, and then it just starts to spin and shake, and it's just a hot mess. So, you know, and I've always just run 15 pounds of air pressure. That's just what I've done. So Tom was like, all right, we ended up at 16 pounds, and that helped. But then we started playing with the, and I have double adjustable shocks. We started playing with the compression and the rebound. So, and I had it 10 and 10. So there was kind of middle of the road for the shock adjustment. And so he's like, let's speed up the rebound. So the extension, we want to, let me think here. Yeah, we want to loosen that so it will actually extend harder or faster. And then we want to crank down the compression so that it holds it there. So we went from 10 and 10 to 5 and 15.
Okay.
So it was extending faster. But what I didn't know was by tightening the compression as the car is trying to work, by tightening the compression, you're actually loading the tire even more. And I didn't know that. So by tightening the compression, you're planting the tire even more. And my question was if it was balling up the tire today, even though the track was not great, there must have been enough traction to do that before it started to break loose, which maybe that would have been a good time to try the radial. I'm not quite sure, because the plan was to try those today, but we never got there. And then the track started to go away. And so there wasn't a reason to keep going. I mean, we did run a 1.42 60 foot, which was pretty decent for my setup. And we'd like to keep whittling that away. I think if the track was better, we would have been able to hit it with more power off the hit and ramped it in quicker. But
what type of RPM, Bill?
Say that again.
What type of RPM?
Launching at 4,000, but when I dump the clutch, it runs into the clutch at 5. So it spikes 1,000 more. So it was hitting the clutch at 5,000 RPM.
Sure.
And it would stick for a little bit, and then about 10 feet out, it would start to spin. If we started adding more power. And really what we did is modified the boost curve to just not bring in the boost so hard, because it was too much. Wow, that sun is really making it bright for me, isn't it?
There you go.
Let me switch here a little bit. There we go. So yeah, that's what I learned today. And really what I learned is that I have a lot more to learn.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I'm actually trying to find a really good resource either to read about or listen to on chassis and shock stuff, because I really realized today that I don't know a lot about that.
Yeah.
And I think, like, it's so easy to make power, but you've got to get the chassis lined out, because if you don't, it won't go to the ground.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's the perseverance, I think, with a stick shift car. That's where that all comes in, because it's a continuous learning effort. You know, we're not just changing a converter and, you know, going down the racetrack A to B. I mean, we literally are fighting every, you know, that first 60 foot is so hard for us with our heavy cars and our less than optimal, you know, slipper clutches and all that stuff. And to relate, my experience is the exact opposite. I was crushing a tire, I mean, down to the rim with a tube. And the more rebound I put into it, the less it tried. And you've seen them on some of the stick cars where the rears just come out of them so violently. Boom.
Yeah.
Right in the ground. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So we tighten up the rebound. So, you know, I've got, I believe 18 or 19 clicks and I'm 8 from soft on the rebound because I've got a really heavy rebound in it, and the compression that's at 6. And man, it doesn't kill the rim anymore. You know, and the car's it's actually dragging the motor down. When I launched at 3,800, when I was done last year at the end of the season, I was dragging the motor down finally. And typically that never happened. It was all or nothing. It was either spin or stick. And now I was getting consistent with it because the shock was controlling all of that. And that seems so key with the stick shift stuff, you know, the right spring and the right shock, and just getting to controlling all of that mass that you've just put into play right away.
And so yeah, for sure. You have shock sensors on yours?
No, I don't. I wish I did.
Yeah, so I know Rich has those, and I'm like, God, I don't need to add all this stuff, but boy, now I think that data can be really important.
Yep. Well, I just put a dominator in the car, so now I've got the inputs. But I ran an HP for years. I just didn't have enough inputs. But now it's really time to get serious.
Who's tuning it for you?
I've got this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's a real shooting star, isn't he?
He is a little whiffy at times too, just see.
Yeah, I actually have Cadillac ride sensors is what I use for shock sensors on my car. Works good with the Mega Squirt, but
I'll have to look at Cadillac ride sensors. Okay, cool.
Yeah, they're like $30 off Rock Auto.
Really?
And,
wow.
Yeah, they work.
If that's Canadian, then that means they're $8 US.
Yeah,
right, exactly. Well, that's today. Tomorrow might be a different story. So
yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
But I had all my shock data and I sent it to Viking.
Yeah,
and we bantered back and forth, and you know, I've said to Bill and Travis that I think I could have probably went faster down there, but after looking at the shock data, like I know my front shocks were topping out about halfway through first gear. Rear was okay, like it was still extending just about every gear, and then on a gear change, they would change enough that it would almost reset a little bit.
Okay.
But it's pretty interesting to see that shock data and tell a story with it, because I know that I was struggling the one day and I wasn't looking at my shock data, and when I got home I started looking at the shock data, and it was I was putting more power into it, and like within 0.3 of a second the front shocks were topping out and I would knock the tire off it.
Right. Yep.
But if you don't look at the data, it doesn't help you. But videos really help. But there's lots of things that go on, especially with our cars, that the back of the car is going down, and to try to figure out if the wheel's actually extending out of the chassis. We're trying. It's hard to know, right? So
it's very hard. If you don't have the angle of your camera just right, you'll not see separation out of the rear tire. You think, oh, is that separating? Shock data obviously would tell you that, but if you don't have the right angle, it's very hard to see separation, or if the cars is moving in the way you want it to. I totally agree with that. It's a catch-22. But thank you for the tip on the shock sensors. I'm overdue for those for sure.
Yeah.
So Andy, let's talk, because you have a pretty deep well of knowledge on engine tuning and those types of things. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, like for example, like turbo cars, Rich and I, for us to build boost on the line, we're pulling timing out of it, and I've noticed a few things too, but let's just stick with that for now. But negative timing on an NA car is going to pull power, but in a boosted car, depending how much you pull, it actually starts to build boost, and that's why we do it. So what are the negatives to that? I mean, a lot of heat in the exhaust. I guess if you stay on there real long, you're going to torch exhaust valves and stuff. But what have you seen?
Well, let's talk about what you're calling negative timing. You're talking about timing retard as opposed to negative timing, which is firing, after top dead center. Okay. So typically you fire an engine before top dead center, but when you say negative timing, you're talking about timing retard off of your peak timing, right?
Well, I guess in my car specifically, because we're stick shift, we don't have a load against it like a converter.
Right. Yes.
Literally negative 35 degrees. Well, so okay. So it is after top dead center. It's maybe not actually negative 35. I'm subtracting 35 degrees from my timing, but I know it's probably like -10 after top dead center.
Wow.
But it spools fast and makes boost on the 2-step.
You're right. You know, I'm from the school of, if it works and it's not hurting anything, do it. Right. You know, so everybody's looking for a certain number. You know, we talk about target air fuels. Oh, it's got to be this target air fuel. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. Well, how do you know it's got to be that? And it's all about experimentation and finding out what it wants. If your car wants to be 10 degrees after top dead center for timing in order to build boost, because you're creating all that exhaust heat, because that's what you're doing, right? You're burning the air and fuel in the pipe and not in the cylinder.
Right. Yeah, it
That's
pops
all.
and bangs. It sounds pretty sweet.
Well, yes, sure. You know, and if it doesn't bother anything and it creates a boost, you're able to stage the car and leave. I've got absolutely no problems with that. I really, really don't. I really don't. And but at the same time, I'm probably not the exact guy to ask on that because of what you're doing. I'm not familiar with it, and so therefore take that with a grain of salt. But like I said, if it's doing what it needs to do, and of course you're on a 2-step too, so it's going to pop and bang, and it's probably going to even make it worse because you're firing everything in the pipe. You know, I would get a second opinion for sure, but if it doesn't hurt and it's working,
I think you should take your hood off and put a GoPro, and we should see what color of cherry your headers are.
I would love to see that at the end of a pass. Actually,
it's such a short period of time. You know what I'm saying? It's probably not as bad as you think.
Yeah,
yeah. So I pull mine down to 5 degrees. That's where mine is. So I don't pull from a certain point. I just tell it when you're on the 2-step, 5 degrees timing is where I want you to be.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
In about 2 seconds, it'll build 4.5 pounds of boost.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and every combination is different. You know, when I first did my 13-1 motor and with the big camshaft in it, I thought I needed I started out at 18 degrees of timing because I didn't know. I started there. And I melted every wire within a foot of the headers. Driving down the road, I'm like, what is that smell? All the wiring's burning out of the car because the headers are bright red. So, you know, it's just like anything else. That's bad. So if you're not burning any wiring out of the car and the car's not angry and you haven't knocked any bearings out of it, maybe it's not as bad as you think. It's just what it needs in order to do what it needs to do. So.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy actually when you look at the OEM cars, what kind of timing they do in light load. I mean, it's like 60 degrees sometimes.
Yeah.
It's
you know, when you go back to the interview with Ben, he was talking about timing, you'd be surprised at how much timing you can have at part throttle, no load. You know, it's really a fascinating dynamic. And, you know, all you have to do really is take a, you know, a 1972 Chevrolet 350 with a set of points in the vacuum advance and run that motor to 2,500 with no load on it. You'd be surprised to see that thing's well into the 50s. You know, in order to keep it clean. And so that whole art of timing really is still a black mystery to a lot of people. It's an unknown thing. And that's a common question I get all the time. Where should I run my timing, or where should I run, you know, the spark plug heat range and what have you? But you're right. Yeah, that's 60 degrees in some applications isn't that far-fetched.
After that podcast with Ben on my trip to Sick Week, light load, 54 degrees timing. Starting to, you know, lug the motor a bit because I'm only running down the highway at 1,700 RPM.
Yeah, right. Yes. Wow.
But even then, it loves 50 degrees or 54, and if you're going up a slight incline, it'll pull it down to 42. But anywhere in that 40 to 54, it's happy as, and you can see the EGTs all come down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Rich, do you want to tell us how you figured out that it liked that much timing?
Yeah. I put a new balancer on. I went from ATI to Innovators West, and my trigger wheel is mounted to the pulley. And so on a Pontiac or even some of the Chevys, they have 4 bolts or 3 bolts. And when I went to bolt it up, I was thinking, you know, I'm going to have to re-drill some holes and do all that stuff. Well, the thing bolted right up. And I looked at the timing marks and I thought, geez, that's actually probably pretty close. You know, once I fire this thing up, I'm not going to have to move my timing much. Yeah, well, I didn't move it at all. So I burnt the head gaskets out of it. I might have still beat Bill though. And torched the head gasket at Rocky Mountain Race Week. and lift, and the other head gasket wasn't in great shape either. I didn't change it, but coming
This was
home,
the all-nighter that we did, right? That's the all-nighter.
that was the all-nighter, yeah.
Oh, I hate those.
And yeah, it was 5 o'clock in the morning when we fired it up, and we cracked the header, so it sounded like the bottom end was coming out of the thing. And
Oh no.
it was bad. We all just looked. We all had a bunch of sad faces. But I still didn't check the timing, and I was coming home, and I was actually in Shelby, Montana. I'm like 6 hours from home, and for about the last 3 hours before I got there, I'm thinking, I don't ever remember if I checked the timing after I put that new balancer on. I pulled out the timing light at the parking lot. I had 15 degrees more than I thought I did.
Yeah.
So I had 15, 16 pounds of boost and 41 degrees of timing.
Yeah, baby. Wow. And you'd be surprised of all the cars I get to work on. First, we don't have pointers on a lot of motors. I don't know how anybody checks their timing without a pointer. But
Yeah.
the synchronization process is so key. I mean, you can't do anything until everything is right. And everything is especially in the timing area, because you don't have a good baseline to start with. You don't know where anything's at. So yeah, that's
it
a
was
rookie,
good education.
that's a rookie mistake, Rich.
Yes. Yeah.
So Andy, tell us a little bit about your company and what you do, because you tune cars, you do that stuff. So you plug yourself and talk about it a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess I've decided to step into the realm of tuning, and working with Hilborn and doing all the fuel injection and doing all the support there, tuning all these cars, all these IR cars, these supercharged cars, and coming to the table with an engine assembly knowledge and a racing knowledge. I decided that now's the time to step in and start taking the next level of my career. So I did start my own business, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I've got I've met some amazing people along the way. I guess one of my most exciting things now is I'm doing a lot of stuff with Sonny Leonard's racing engines, tuning a lot of their big cubic inch stuff. And,
nice.
There's going to be some interesting NA cars coming out this year, with some pretty interesting power, some big cubic inch stuff. So that's been a lot of fun. Is
this all remote tuning that you do, or are you going to their shop?
Who's that again?
Is it remote tuning you're doing for Sonny Leonard, or are you going there?
It depends. It depends on the application. I've done remote and I've done on site with them.
Oh.
So some of the stuff, you really need to be there. What I found is that in order to find what the engine wants, the engine builder really, in this case, really knows what they want. But when you're listening to the motor, when you can look at the spark plug with the engine builder and get the feedback there, and being able to listen to it and talk back and forth, that really is just such an amazing way to dial it all in. And it's really fascinating. I don't know about you guys, but if you're not pulling spark plugs, how do you really know what the engine is doing? How do you know it's where it needs to be? So
how do you know if you're running 15 degrees extra time?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, the spark plug will tell you that, but after the fact, that's when you don't really want to know that. You want to be sneaking up on that.
Yeah.
But the long short of it is you're right. There's more to just pushing buttons when it comes to tuning. I'm from the old school. You have to listen to the motor. You have to read the spark plug. You have to get feedback from the driver. All these things are so important in order to go ahead and find an ideal tune. As a matter of fact, I was just working with a customer the other day. We went to the racetrack and we had an O2 sensor issue. We put a new one in there, no O2 sensor. Now what are we going to do? The car's never been down the racetrack. So we had to go ahead and do all the part throttle work without an O2, the drivability without an O2, put it on a two-step without an O2, do the burnout without O2. We had to listen to the motor, and we figured that all out. We have 3 passes into it before we finally made a full run, because I was able to extrapolate into the fuel table where it needed to be. And I said, I think we'll probably be okay. And we made a pass. The thing was a little fat. We didn't have an O2. We couldn't correct off of it. And the car went almost its best time it ever went. So, listening to the car and the feedback from the driver is so key. And so that's where being on site really helps out. Devin did a great video on the different types of tuners. And basically he said, I won't remote tune because I can't hear the car. And that's the old school tuning way of doing it. And that's where I think I lay my hat also. But yeah, I specialize in the IR stuff, the supercharged stuff. I'm getting a lot more into alcohol stuff. I was fortunate enough to actually, back in the day when Feld Motorsports was still doing injected, big blocks in the Gravedigger, for an example. And they approached us at Hilborn to do proof of concept for EFI at all of the monster jams. And so I helped develop proof of concept with them on a dyno, went out and to their field and tuned up, their first monster truck on EFI on alcohol to prove that it could be done. Because those things are so radical, the way they move and slosh around and do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And now pretty much that whole entire segment is all EFI in order to try and keep the emissions down. And so when Mike Wales, who has since passed, came to us to try and do that because, they were getting complaints about the smell in the arenas, and we and it worked out really well. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the spark plug thing is really, or spark plug / O2 is pretty interesting. I mean, I had my one buddy, Ted, he ran a whole event with a bad O2 and, the car was fighting him the whole time. And I'm as guilty as anyone of not pulling spark plugs near as much as I should. So I definitely got to get better at that. And, even when you're running 54 degrees of timing, you should almost throw a set of plugs in, drive for, I don't know, 5 miles or something, pull it up.
That is a great idea. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, really, it takes a long time to inch into a tune-up like that.
Yeah.
You should, and obviously it feels really good, so you're good, but who knows, if you're 54, you go to 55, and next thing you know, the thing's too hot and you wind up having some other issues. You don't know. So knowing where you're at with that spark plug and what it's doing, and really you can look at a spark plug and say it looks great, but really what are you looking at? Right.
Yeah.
Are you looking at, and I mean, I was tuning a stock Luminaire car with a Copo motor in it. And I'm pulling spark plugs out of this thing that's burning a CAD off of an NGK, almost a thread and a half. And I looked at this guy and said, this thing's not going to make it. We need to take timing out. And we did. We took a degree and a half out of this thing. Sorry, we took 3 degrees out of this thing, and it promptly slowed down 1500s. Promptly. And I was like, oh, well, obviously that's what this thing wants. We put it back up to 33 degrees on this LS motor, and this thing ran its bacon off. It was amazing. Wow. So it just depends on the fuel, the cam, the dynamic compression, all that stuff, the RPM in the motor, all these things come into play when it comes to timing. And it was scary. I thought for sure we weren't going to make it through the rest of the weekend, but yeah, that's what that motor wanted.
So let's dive into the spark plugs a little more. So when you do it, do you like to cut the threads off to get a look at everything as far as the fire, is it called the fire ring or the fuel ring and all that?
The fuel ring inside.
Just dive in a little bit on the spark plugs and how you read them.
No, that's a really good question. So I really don't. I don't have the facilities to do that. And the nitrous guys, I think, are also using some of that to identify cylinder trim too. I'm not as worried about that and what I'm doing, to be totally honest with you. I don't have the data unless you're running GTs. You just don't have the data to do that. So we're not only looking at spark plug, we're looking at ET mile an hour also. But no, I have a little spark plug reader. I've learned to, take a look at the temperature of the thread, the temperature of the ground strap, the temperature of the electrode. All those things come into play. And so if you're looking at it and you go, okay, this looks pretty good, then you make a change. And then you have to decide whether the change is good or better. And typically you make a change going backwards, so that way you don't hurt anything. And if it makes it better or the same, you leave it there. If it gets worse, well, let's try going a little bit further the other way. So, it just depends on, what you're looking at and how to interpret it, really is what it comes down to. And so that takes years and years of reading these things to identify it. And still, as you can tell, I still don't even nail it right. It's like, wow, this thing shouldn't even be working. And here it wanted every bit of that timing in order for it to run right. So
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But at least you can keep it safe. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure Rich probably would have seen little black speckles somewhere on his, on his electrode, and given him a clear indication that he had too much timing in the motor. And of course, the electrode's no longer white. It's turning a yellow color because it's so hot. It's burning the fuel off of it right away, and all kinds of little things like that. And, it's just like, okay, what am I doing wrong here?
Yeah, and it was
And,
yelling
I
out to
think,
the head gasket. He says, "If you won't look at me, why don't you tell him something's wrong?"
That's right.
well, and I think, like Bill said, on the last podcast, I mean, I run C16 and it's a pretty safe fuel, and
Sure. Yep.
there was probably some head bolt issues on there too, but it ran good mile an hour actually at that timing. And
That's when it runs
typically,
its best, Rich. That's when it runs its best, right before it blows up. That's when it runs its best.
Lean is mean.
Lean is mean, yeah. And I think the other piece I wanted to touch on there is it's amazing all the different things that can affect an O2 sensor.
Yeah.
Like little leaks and all that kind of stuff too. And if it throws it off, you just don't know. So I think, yeah, I know, like I said, I need to be much better at diligent at reading plugs when making changes for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And, you know, in my car, you know, with the slip together collectors, even though you try and glue those up and all those other things, you know, if I try to run anything targeted idle of 14.5 to 1, the thing's going to be belching black smoke.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, the targets or no O2 correction at idle in some of these cars is important. You just can't look at a number. You got to find out what it wants. And that's really what we're doing. You know, we're just trying to find out what makes that combination happy, what makes it fast, what's going to make it live. You know, when we do drag and drive, you know, it's a combination of everything, right? You know, we want the best of both worlds. So,
yeah.
And you know, and one of the things I'm looking at now is, you know, running speed density with a map sensor on the highway, but at the racetrack going to Alpha N. Obviously, you guys can't do that because you need to have a map sensor to measure boost, but the NA cars, you know, where we don't have that luxury and we seem to be a little bit more handicapped with atmospheric pressure and, you know, map sensor issues, you know, changing into this archaic Alpha N has really helped us. We had an issue with Josh Norris's car the last day of sick week. And we just did not have any atmospheric pressure on the map sensor. And a lot of the guys were slow. And here come to find out we weren't in an area where we had enough fuel. I put the thing in Alpha N. I said, we're done with this. We'll put it in Alpha N. And now, you know, we've got a different tuning algorithms, but these are some of the things that we're learning as we go along to differentiate between the street car and the race car, and what's the best way to tune those in for consistency at the races.
So I'm going to ask another question about the spark plugs. So
okay.
what's your ideal way to check a plug? Put a fresh plug or plugs in, make a pass, and then what do you want to shut it off and coast back to the pits, or
well, no, actually
driving it back really wreck the reading?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll typically put a fresh plug in it in the staging lanes, start it up, do the burnout, run it through your paces, run it to the top of the racetrack, click it clean. All right. Coast, pull off, and then the driver will swap out the plug while, you know, he's taking care of the chute or, you know, get ready to come back. And typically to get a good fuel ring, I need 1 or 2 passes. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes 2 passes to get a good fuel ring. But yeah, you can't drive it back, Bill. It's done. The party's over once you drive it.
Will that affect the heat, you know, the mark that it leaves on the ground strap though? I mean, once that's burned off, driving it back's not going to affect that, right?
Well, no, not at all. But you're looking at the fuel ring. Like you can start putting, you know, at the bottom of the plug where the ground strap is welded. That's a really good indication of how overrich a car can be, and you know that can turn up black and sooty by the time you get back to the staging or to pits. Now you don't have a good plug to look at, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. And burnout and staging doesn't really affect the reading much.
No, it really doesn't, because the event that you're really looking for is going to burn a lot of that excess off the plug, especially a clean plug, a fresh plug.
Yeah.
So that's why you want to cut it clean at the top end of the racetrack. Yeah, and really have no choice. You have no choice either way. You still have to perform those procedures with a fresh plug because you can't stop competition and put another plug in. So
for sure.
I just leave 15 extra degrees of timing, and that cleans them.
Oh my man, cleans them right through to the head gasket. Perfect.
It traps good though.
That's right. That's like I said, it runs its best right before it blows up. There's no doubt, but no, that's what we do, and it's been an exciting. I've got a couple of guys at Drag and Drive that you know we're working with this year, so I'm excited to see the potential we can get out of them with some of their cars. So it'll be very, very exciting.
So Andy, who is your ideal customer?
Who's my ideal customer?
What is an ideal customer? Let's say
a great question.
It really is a great question. You know, here's my problem. I wound up becoming friendly with all my customers, and I don't know.
Do you have an OnlyFans page?
An OnlyFans page? No, I don't have an OnlyFans page. So Glenn Hunter has a sticker on the side of his car, I guess on his window, and it basically says "No dickheads." So if you're not a dickhead, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I'm okay with it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I have an ideal customer, to be totally honest with you. I like to help people. If I, in all honesty, if I could do this for free, I would. But I can't. So, but that's really what it comes down to. I mean, the racing world is chock full of so many amazing people, and you know, they have become my extended family. And it seems like, you know, like I said, I befriend my customers, and that's really, if I can do that, then that's really the ideal customer for me.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's one of the things about drag and drive is stem to stern, right? Like you got a cold start, you got hot starts, you've got city driving, you got highway cruising, you got quarter mile passes. Like that's what makes well, I think it was game changing for the industry, the more drag and drive events and everything, because everything's got to be right.
Well, you know, to let the cat out of the bag, wide open throttle is easy.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, as far as tuning the fuel, I mean, if you have your target air fuel that you want and you have your timing that you want, you figure that all out. Tuning the fuel is real simple. But my gosh, tuning it at part throttle, getting the transitions right, the accelerator pump enrichment, the startup, the flare, you know, all those things. And then, you know, every ECU does something different. So the fast ECU works a lot different than the Holly does. And then, you know, I'm doing a little more big stuff now. And we have a thing that I've termed sphere of influence, and how the fuel tables work with the actual way that the table follows based on RPM and load. Every ECU is different. So finding that sweet spot for all those is important. And then of course, you know, finding what that car wants and how it all works together. So you're right, Rich. It is really, you're working the tune up from stem to stern. Everything has been touched. Yeah.
Do you have a
Matt
favorite?
Blasco's got my
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, Matt Blasco, you said his name, keep going.
he's got my car on Barrow now, so we don't run speed density, we run Barrow, and it is amazing. I never touched my tune all the way from leaving here at minus 20, driving it all the way down to Florida, the altitude change, everything. I never touched my tune. I played with boost. That was all I did on my car. It was amazing.
Sure. You know, and that's actually pretty brilliant. You know, OEMs do a lot of that too. Back in the day, you know, used to key off, key on, and would measure Barrow and then adjust the fuel table accordingly. And now we can do it from the inside. And you know, I don't know Matt personally, but I've heard of his wares, and that's a pretty impressive tuning technique for sure. So
do you have a favorite ECU, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, the past 7 or 8 years I've concentrated with the Holly, and I really kind of know that thing inside and out, and we can do a lot of things with it, and I'm very, very comfortable with it. Yes, so right now the Holly is number one, but I've been doing a lot of big stuff lately, and that's a pretty nice little piece too, that new pro system they have. Yeah.
So yeah, and I think you and I talked earlier, like I always think of big stuff as one of the very first fuel injection systems, like for high performance stuff. And I was like, why are you working with that old school stuff? But it sounds like they've come out with a new, like brand new updated system.
So yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, John Meany was the originator of DFI back in the day, and his big stuff is like his 3rd or 4th iteration of his electronic controls. So maybe that's where some of that comes into play. But it's just like anything else, you know, you got to stay on top of your game by introducing new product that works. And the Holly has a huge resolution table for fuel and spark. Nobody can touch it. But there's certain things that the big stuff does that, you know, makes it an attractive piece for certain types of tuners. So you're right. It just depends on what you like and what you need. But no, their new stuff's not old school at all. It's based off some old school design, but it's pretty trick and pretty fast.
So can I set up the Holly to run on Barrow?
So the answer to that question is yes, but you need to get the data first. So, you know, does the Barrow, and in this particular case, does the Barrow sensor identify the change in atmosphere that you're looking for? And then, yes, you can build an advanced table using Barrow to automatically correct the fuel table in a sliding scale, just like an E85 sensor, to adjust fueling as see fit. And also, you can also do it for timing too. So yeah, the answer is absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
So Andy, if a guy called you up and wanted to build a drag and drive car, would you walk him through a whole bunch of things? I just see one of the things we didn't ask you about your car was like the fuel system.
Yeah.
So would you work with a customer like, hey, I want to build a drag and drive car, give me some recommendations?
Sure.
And then tell us what you're running for fuel pump on your car.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, so there's so much to a drag and drive car, and it depends on a level. You know, if you're going to take your 1986 Camaro on drag and drive and not do anything with it, well, so be it. But if you're going to stick, you know, an 1800 horsepower E85, you know, pro charge piece in it, well, now the conversation has changed dramatically, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, E85 would be nice because you can run that fuel all the time, but I run gasoline. A lot of guys still run gasoline. So now let's just kind of deal with back to the NA world, where, you know, we'll run pump gas and then we'll switch to race gas. For me, it made sense for me to put 2 fuel systems in the car. So I've got a 15-gallon cell in a trunk, and right next to it for pump gas.
Rich is flexing over there.
I was just itching. I was.
Oh, okay. I'm like, all right, Bill, good for you. Nice. So
sorry, keep going there, Andy.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No problem. So yeah, so I have a 5-gallon race fuel cell for race gas. So I carry my race gas with me. I've sold Weldon pumps for years when I was with Hilborn, and they are by far, in my opinion, the most reliable pumps on the road. So I have a racing pump from Weldon, and then I have one of their, we call them a silver bullet pump for driving. And so that's it. And a lot of guys like to use ball valves for each pump. And I don't know if I remember you reading a story about Doug from Motion Raceworks had a ball valve problem.
Yep.
And before that, what I elected to do instead is I put check valves on the outlet of each pump. They're mechanical flapper valves.
It's funny because that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, it's very simple. And the only valve I have to change is for the return line, and then change the switch for each pump that I'm using. So yeah, so the mechanical check valve makes it easy. When one pump fires up, the other one closes, that check valve closes and you're good to go. And I've had mine on my car for I don't know how many years and I've never had a leak, never had an issue. But it takes the thought process out of it. You know, when you're running around trying to get a car switched over and people are coming up talking to you and you're doing this and you're doing that, if you forget to turn a valve off and you wind up splitting a pump because the thing has been, you know, building internal pressure for the past 5 seconds and it blows up, well, you're done. Why make it difficult? Make it easy. And you know, so those are typically my recommendations. You know, one of the things we do is we spec the feed line, the pressure line, the return line. You know, how to run fuel to the fuel rails. That's still a big question I get. You know, which size line should I run? How does this all work? You know, and understanding the math of the pumps and what's going to happen, and also the amperage rating. You know, so a lot of these pumps, you know, we've got some guys running 3 pumps. You've got 18 amps a pump. And so I don't have to tell you what the amperage rating of that. I mean, that all affects the system. So really, I think having 2 separate pumps in some cases works. And of course, finally you get into mechanical pump if need be. In this case, a belt-driven pump is a perfect example. So depending on what you're running, but yeah, sure, absolutely. That's all part of it. And really that's for any street car. A lot of these guys, a lot of these cars are street cars. So you know, this type of recommendation all comes down to, you know, the power output and the fuel being used, Rich. Yeah.
And what, on your return side, do you have a 3-way valve or you have 2 valves?
Yeah, 3-way valve.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, 3-way valve. Pretty simple. One way it's race fuel, the other one is pump gas. You can't mess it up.
You can if you switch pumps and you forget to return it. I may have turned my plastic fuel cell into a balloon just once.
Well, since I'm getting older and have dementia, I have my little checklist I have. And so I go back to my checklist every time and I make sure I've done all the stupid little things I need to do before we hit the road. So yeah, those mistakes are few and far between, thankfully.
So let me ask, this is a selfish question for Rich and I, because we're boosted, but do you have a preference over like a C16 versus an E85, E98 alcohol type fuel versus a race gas fuel? Do you like one over the other?
So that's a really good question. So I guess it comes down to the confine of the volume of fuel we needed, the injector size. Sometimes, that extra fueling in E85 can become difficult because of, the existing combination. You don't want to replace everything and move into E85. Right. But I think there's a home for E85. Obviously, its cooling properties work well. But one of the things I do think is that you can't switch E85 and remove an intercooler. I do think you still need an intercooler with E85. And even alcohol in some applications. So, a lot of people think that, man, I'll run E85, I'll be in good shape, I won't need an intercooler, and I totally disagree with that. Intercooler is an important part of any recipe when it comes to a boosted car, even on E85.
But methanol would be the exclusion, right?
And well, it just really depends. There's plenty of methanol cars out there that are running intercoolers, and there's a reason for that. So I think it comes down to the application and what you're doing. What's really interesting too is I tuned up an E85 Gen 3 Hemi with a Pro Charger. We did it on gasoline, and we had a baseline on gasoline, and we switched into E85. We upgraded the injectors. We did all these things. We did the math, and this thing took darn near double the amount of fuel on E85 compared to gasoline. Our math was way out to lunch, doubled it.
Wow.
And I mean, the fuel numbers, so the injectors we put in it wound up being, at the fringe out of that, the fuel pump was too small. So it really is amazing how much E85 these combinations will drink in order to cool everything down, especially these Pro Chargers. They use so much fuel to generate the power to generate the power, and the fueling required. It's phenomenal. It really is.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's interesting, because I've thought about switching to E85. I run C16 ish also. I run the Sunoco Max NOS, but I believe that's right. The same.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I've got plenty of injector, but I would have to put a bigger fuel pump in it. And the cost difference for the fuel pump, I'm like, it would take more than a couple of years between the price difference between E85 and C16.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Sure, absolutely. It needs bigger feed lines. You're going to have probably more amperage. All those things come into play. And, so if you're if you don't have enough alternator, now all of a sudden, if you're on the edge of not having enough alternator, now you don't have enough alternator, you really have to look at the whole system as one as you start upgrading parts, because it affects everything else. Yeah, you betcha. Sure.
Do you have a G meter in your car at all?
I do now.
Yeah, I just got one from Matt, but I got to put one in too. That'll be interesting data, because my quickest pass on sick week, was like 162 miles an hour, and when I went and looked at the data, I had been shifting like 500 RPM less. But it was my best 60 foot. I went 141 60 foot, and I went 875. But I'm convinced if I would have shifted up at $7,000, that it would have been quicker. But the reality is, I don't really know. But a G meter should tell you that a lot more accurately. So I can't wait to look at that data.
Also, I'm going to find it interesting to tune in a clutch. You know what I'm saying? So, yes. With a tire and a clutch, I can look at G and see what it's doing. So I'm really excited about trying that this year. I've not tried it either. So I think it's going to be an eye opener as to what type of data we'll see with that. I agree with that.
It's funny. Good. My buddy Ted says to me, "How much information do you need?" And I'm thinking, all of it.
You can't not have enough information. It's now interpreting it and knowing what to do with it's a different story. But you have to start somewhere. You have to start developing that database. And every day that you don't have it, you don't have that database to work from. You bet.
Yeah.
So.
I'm just looking at the questions here.
Sure.
So whose car were you turning? You were tuning on at sick week? You were tuning on.
Oh yeah, I was hanging out with Josh Norris and Randy Bellahar. Those guys are monsters. They're animals.
Yeah, Randy.
They never stop.
You weren't helping Randy very much. He kept going too fast every pass. So.
Oh my gosh, a 49 with a 5, a 49 with a 7.
Yeah.
We were literally at the racetrack till it was 5 o'clock for the first 3 days. It was berserk. It was a long night every night.
Yeah.
But those cars are so good. We didn't have any issues. They've got them all sorted out and what have you. And we just had a great time with it. So yeah, and it was nice to get out of the weather. I don't have to tell you, Rich. I don't know about your situation, Bill, but my gosh, the stuff that you were posting driving through 6 foot of snow, it's berserk. We didn't have anything like that. So I bet you Florida was awesome.
It was awesome. Yeah. This compared to last year, the weather was so good during the event and sucked all the way down and all the way back this year. But the 6 days or 7 days that I was in Florida, it was fantastic. So I'll take that if I have to drive through a little snow.
So allow me to ask you a question, Rich, because I know Bill, since you're using the bank shift Billy, you probably don't have a fully adjustable clutch in your car. But Rich, do you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Bill's on mute, so we'll let him keep talking. But I'll talk in the meantime. So yeah, I run I run a Black Magic single 11-inch clutch from Kale.
Okay.
So it's got 6 fingers.
Oh wow!
Actually, because of the last podcast, I did the math today to figure out how much pressure on launch and how much pressure going through the traps, and I'm launching with about 1,700 pounds of pressure.
Wow!
And it's slipping like 1.4 seconds, and then as I go through the traps, I'm at about 5,800 pounds of pressure. So when you're driving around the pits, it feels like there's nothing there. And then when you're going through the traps, you're like, trying to. It's like,
I'm really surprised you're able to do that with a single disc, quite frankly.
Well, I'll tell you, when Kale told me he was going to set me up with a single 11-inch, and I'm like, buddy, you don't know what you do, but I'll try it. And he was like, it'll work. And the first time I went for a drive on the road, it was slipping, and I'm like, 1,800 RPM or something at that point. And he's like, just throw a little bit more counterweight. I'm thinking that counterweight ain't gonna work at 18, and it fixed it up just like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is amazing. When I get to the track, so I've got like 78 grams is what's on there now. And then when and about 6 turns of base in it, which I don't know what that equates to off the top of my head, but when I get to the track, I pull all the base out of it and put half a turn in.
Wow.
So it feels like there's nothing, but all the counterweight it's working really well now, and I can modulate. I never have to change the counterweight. All I have to change is basically I put the base down there and then change the RPM slightly.
That's amazing. And do you think that if you were to bring the clutch in a little bit sooner, that the car would 60 foot better, or do you think it would knock the tire off?
I think, once Viking gets these shocks back to me and I can control the car better, I think I know there's more in it. My boost curve is not nearly as aggressive. I'm not at max boost till the top of second gear right now, and I'm pretty sure I can bring it in faster, but I didn't have to beat Frank. Hopefully he'll listen. Like I was about 7/10 ahead of Frank, and I was worried about braking for a few reasons. I had to drive it home, and I didn't need to go. If I would run in the 8 every day, that was my pack it up and go to the next track, because it doesn't make any sense to beat up on it. Like you said, every pass is.
So if you were to not have any boost, who would win that race between you and Frank if you didn't have any boost?
Well, it would take me a while to get to Frank's level. Right now, he would totally kick my ass.
So Frank and I have, when I first started bringing the car out, Frank and I had because we were both Tri-5s with stick shifts, we had our friendly little rivalry going. And, we had a lot of fun with that, because that car's really fast. That car's really, really fast. So, considering the small tire and all the stuff that, that car has going against it, as mine with all the heavy weight and what have you, it is extremely fast. So
how fast have you been?
I've gone 932 at 147.95 in that car.
Oh, you guys are close then, hey? You're close.
That's fast. Yeah.
I think his best was sick week last year was a 930. I think.
Yeah, he's faster than me by a couple ticks for an all time. So, but
he's ramping up to spray that thing now.
Yeah, that's a form of cheating in my book. I don't know. It's so impressive. It's so impressive what he's doing with that car. I hate to see him sully it with a little bit of nitrous, you know.
Yeah, he doesn't like second place very much, though.
What's that?
He doesn't like second place very much.
And really, who doesn't? You know, I mean,
Yeah,
let's face it, who doesn't? You know,
yeah.
If you take the same power plants that he and I have and you put it in a car that's 800 pounds lighter, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
For a standard, you know, valve angle cylinder head, I think he's got a 20 degree in his, but it doesn't matter. You know, you take our combinations, which are relatively, you know, off the shelf, if you will, and you put them in a lighter car, you're well in the 8-second zone. And there's nothing too shabby with our combinations in that particular instance.
So you guys both have amazing cars for NA.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, he's keeping a rivalry alive. It's a lot of fun catching up with him and see what he's doing. So, yep,
it's impressive for sure.
What else we got for questions here? What are we at? We're at 1 hour and 40 minutes in.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Nope.
I was hoping to keep it short tonight.
Well, Rich, you want to hit the TKO round with him?
Yeah, well, why don't you tell him? I think he was going to ask you what you're doing for your management too. I don't know if any speed on your.
Yeah, so I run a. Yeah, the reason I was asking about your clutch because I run a twin disc Ram Pro Street with twin 5135 discs as well.
Yeah,
and it's like a 2,700 pound pressure plate.
Okay,
and then of course I use the Bankshift Billy to modulate that, and that's that. You know, that's what we did today. And I can get a data log that looks damn near close to like what Rich's looks like as far as the clutch slip and the engagement.
Nice.
With that.
Very
so
nice.
It seems to work.
Now, one of these days, I'm going to have to move it to a Bankshift Billy. I'm not there yet.
I know a guy that can help.
You know a guy? So all right. You let me know. You let me know his number sometime.
Okay.
That's cool. That's cool. That's great. And I do think the centered iron disc, you know, it's kind of like the spool of yesteryear. You can't run that spool on the street, you'll break all kinds of stuff, and that wound up being hooey. But I think the same thing for centered iron disc. If you drive it right, you know, gosh, I had mine in the car for 2.5 years before I finally said I think I need to take it out. And you know, it was due. Not as due as I thought it was going to be, but it was due. But that's not too bad for centered iron disc.
Yeah, and I found there are certain brands of disc. Frankly, the Ace disc has significantly longer life out of any of the other ones I've tried.
Interesting. Cool. Because that's what I'm running and it seems to work pretty good. So.
Yeah. Like literally it's more than double. Like I had a Bonifonte in there disc and the coefficient of friction and the way that they work is relatively similar.
Okay.
I mean, they're still 5135s, but yeah, after an event, the clutch was just completely wasted. And last year, other than reshimming the clutch, I ran the same disc for both race weeks, like a Car Takeover, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 events all summer. And I don't know, 7,000 miles of driving. And I had the same discs in there. I did have to reshim it a few times because you only get so much. You can only move so far with a hydraulic setup.
Right.
So I had to reshim it, but I had the same discs in there. Now,
awesome.
Normally would I have changed them out? Maybe, but because I couldn't even get discs, I didn't have another option. And
sure.
Now I know I just keep reshimming it and it works great. So yeah, Ace discs are my go-to. Those are the ones I really, really like.
I really do think the whole clutch thing, I think it is the Achilles heel of all of our stick shift cars. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And obviously there's so many ways to go about getting down the racetrack with the clutch, but I do think I'm still trying to find that perfect clutch where it's drivable, streetable, easy to work on, and slips what we need. Not only slips at the starting line, but slips at the gear change like it's supposed to, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, see, there's going to be a balance between, you know, your base pressure and your counterweight, because the counterweight is supposed to come unlatched during the gear change. And that would be but you know, you guys are using so much counterweight to keep the clutch engaged because you're not using any base, right? To get the clutch to slip correctly. So we can't see that disengagement at the gear change, which I think is so important.
Yeah. So that is a problem that I've had because I've twisted a few input shafts with the clutchless shifting.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have a whole basket full of them.
You know, Wall of shame, baby. Yep.
But what I'm doing now is when that rev limiter kicks back off, I'm actually pulling about 30 degrees of timing to soften when the power comes back on, just to soften it over a time gradient, just enough. And it has helped. I wouldn't say it's eliminated the twisting, but it has significantly reduced it.
Are you using the torque management in the transmission setup of the Holly? So
no,
it's here's gear change?
I guess you and I need to talk, because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
Oh, so they have torque management like the OEMs.
They do. It's based on gear per gear change, and you really don't even need that per se. That's a real nice feature, but we can also do it in other ways with the Holly system to bring in torque management based on time per gear change. Sure.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing, and that seems to be helping. But maybe that's a conversation we should have offline.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got a couple questions. What was one? Oh yeah, when are we going? So did you sign up for Drag Week, or when are we going to see you back out?
Oh man, I'm telling you, I'm getting prepared for Midwest Drags this year.
Okay.
That's my big one. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do as many drag and drivers as I want, so we'll see what happens come the end of the year. But right now I'm gearing up for Midwest Drags.
Nice.
That's really kind of in my backyard, and I think Hyde does a great job with promoting it, and he's just a super good dude, and he's a stick shift guy on top of it. So I'm excited to support his event. So that's it for right now, other than racing locally and cruising the car. You bet. That's my role plan this year. So
that's awesome.
Well, if you try clutchless shifting on the other gears, I'm guessing if you do the same method as Bill, where you basically run into a rev limit and cut a certain amount, that should get you unloaded enough to shift, hopefully.
Yeah, I've been looking at strain gauges, and I think there's a spot for a strain gauge, in order to go ahead and try and get that to work. Introducing it with the shifter handle, I think, is the hardest part. But I would love to see if Long Shifters comes out with a strain gauge equipped, long shifter handles, so that way I can just bolt it and go. That might be a conversation to have.
We could talk about the strategy that I use, because I hit the rev limiter at 7,000.
Yep.
And it cuts off, and it doesn't come back on until like 5,250. So it's just right about the amount of the drop anyway. So you just apply pressure, and as soon as it hits, boom, it shifts, and then it's back on, and you just apply pressure and it hits. So you're shifting at the same RPM every single time, and it's significantly faster than kicking the clutch. That's what I found.
Wow. All right. I'm game. I'll try anything once. So.
And then the way I do it is I have a shift cut knob. It's actually from Czechoslovakia. A guy makes them there. It's a really nice piece. And so it's got micro switches, and it's a rocker. So it doesn't move very much, but it moves a little bit. And so if you're in first gear, I launch with my hands on the steering wheel. And as soon as I pull the top of the shifter, it cuts ignition and fuel for 0.12 of a second.
Wow.
Which allows me to get into the next gear. And then I have half a second to get my hand off the shifter to get it back to the neutral position. And then same thing. I push forward, it cuts ignition and fuel for 0.12. And so
wow.
You guys are like a strain gauge, but it's way more basic than a strain gauge. You
guys are way more technically advanced than I am. That's all I got to say. Wow.
I don't know about that.
Yes,
I don't know about that, but
no, that's great. I had no idea you guys were doing that. And that really sounds like, I mean, if it's helping you, it would help out any type of, obviously that whole time frame between gear change and engagement of the gear, if you're clutching it in any way, you're killing momentum, you're slowing everything down. And that's a big to do, especially for an NA car. I mean, that's huge. So those are all awesome tips.
Well, I was telling Tony and Tess when I put fuel injection on my car, that TPS module there, that is like, it's a huge tattletale.
Oh, you bet.
I would, when I was using the clutch and I would let off the gas, just about every time I wasn't flooring it again. And the car had so much power that, it's not like it's going slow and I'm trying to push my foot through the floor. It's like, it's pulling hard. And So when I, now I don't, I launch the car with my foot on the floor and it doesn't come off until the end of the pass, but,
You have to train yourself to do that.
oh, you totally do.
You have
Yeah.
to train yourself to do that. I was guilty too, letting my foot off during the 1-2 shift. And, it took a little bit. You had to really think about it. Don't let up. Don't let up. Grab the gear. Don't let up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be amazed at the people who run carburetors who don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah. I remember working lights out a couple of years ago when I was working for Holly, and a guy come over and he was complaining that the boost was falling off and blah, 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 blah. And I'm looking at the log and I'm like, well, guy's taking his foot off the throttle. So I said, well, here, I said, the guy's getting off the throttle. He goes, I didn't even see that. Oh. And he left, he turned around and walked away. And he knew exactly what was going on, but the driver would have never told him he was letting off the throttle, but it was killing the boost. It was killing the run, but you're right. It's an excellent tattletale. I love it. We're all guilty of it. So,
yeah. Okay. We better get going, Bill, or I'll just keep picking his brain all night.
All right. TKO round. So it's a 5-speed transmission. We got 5 questions.
Could be a G-force. Could be a G-force round.
Yes, let's do the GF5R round.
Okay. All right. GF5R round. First gear. What's the first car you owned or modified?
So I bought my first car when I was 15 years old. It was a 66 Super Sport Nova. And you know what, Bill, you'll like this. About a month before I bought that car, I was 15 years old, and the car I test drove I was going to buy was a 66 Fairlane GT 390 4-speed Ford 9-inch car. That was a certified 12-second, bottom 12-second car. And I didn't buy it because the clutch pedal felt weird, and I'm 15 years old. How am I going to fix it? And so I told the guy, no, it's $1,200. It's $1,200. So what I do a month later, I buy the Chevy 2 with no motor, no transmission in it.
for $1,100, right?
Oh no, I overpaid for it. Well, I'm a Chevy 2 guy. My next door neighbor who befriended me and became kind of like another dad, if you will. He had a 67 Nova LT1 turbo 400 and a set of 488s in it with a 12 bolt. And you're 15 years old, and you stab the throttle in this thing, and it puts you in the seat, and you're just like, what an amazing experience. So I've been a Chevy 2 guy my whole entire life.
Okay. All right.
So long and short of it is I bought this car and it took me 2 years to get it to run. Everybody told me I'd never get it to run. I built my first motor, did my first rear end, put it all in the car. And the opening day of high school, you'll like this story. Opening day of high school, I picked up my best friend and his girlfriend, and I married her 10 years later. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's a pretty neat story.
That's good. That's good.
That's awesome. And the clutch pedal felt way better in the Nova. It was like there was nothing there.
Oh, you know what? I didn't know back then that the Chevy 2s had a recessed oil filter. I fought the clutch linkage on that car for the whole entire time I had it. It was awful. Then come to find out they make an adapter for that. But it's another story for another day. But the clutch in that car was awful. I hated it. But it was a stick shift.
So Vertigate, I guess we're going straight down in the second gear. What, in your opinion, has been the biggest technology change to move our sport forward?
Absolutely, without a doubt, without any question, electronic fuel injection. Electronic fuel injection by far.
I love that answer.
Absolutely. Nothing has advanced the sport, especially for the sportsman racer, than electronic fuel injection. If you think you can go 3,500 horsepower on alcohol with carburetor today, you can forget about it. It's never going to happen. So the nitrous motors last, the supercharged motors last, the tunability is unbelievable. I can go on and on for 100 hours as to why fuel injection is probably the most largest advancement ever in the motorsports realm.
You could almost start a company spouting the benefits of electronic fuel injection.
That's great.
Okay, so long shifter, we're gonna jam it up again and now go into third. If you could spend one day with someone, who would it be and what would you do? And I have been waiting for this because you and I talked about this question the other day and you didn't spill the beans.
Yeah, so you know what? It's really not hard for me. I have it would be my mother, who passed October 15, 2008. And she passed well before I was able to tell her all the things I did wrong growing up, and how she's the reason who I am today, and all the good things that I've done and all the bad things I've avoided. And so I'd love to spend a day just thanking her for all the things that she has done and sacrifices that she made for me growing up. So not to turn down the excitement of the conversation, but really that would be it for sure. Absolutely.
That's a fantastic answer. Yeah, I like that.
It's a good memory for those of us whose parents are still around, right?
Yeah. Enjoy them every day. Enjoy them every day, guys. Absolutely. So happy for you.
That's awesome, Andy.
Okay, I guess we're going straight down into fourth now.
Hold on. Is this clutchless, or I got to pedal to clutch? What are we doing here?
No, clutchless now, buddy.
Clutchless now. All right.
Clutchless now.
Foot to the floor, jammer in the next gear.
That's right.
What influences you to build your cars?
So, that's really interesting. So I never really bracket raced. So the short story is, when I had a 68 Super Sport Camaro that I was going to turn into a super stock eliminator, I was hanging out with a well-known local racer, Ken Montgomery at the time, and he had the triple nickel. He had a 65 Belvedere Hemi car. It was a stick shift car. And it really, I was always a stick shift guy, and that really cemented the stick shift racing for me. And I wanted to emulate him by going stock eliminator racing. So back in 1990, actually late 80s, when Jericho came out, we all bought Jericho transmissions. And so I had a Jericho on the street for years. I couldn't bracket race the car. I was done with the stock eliminator thing. I couldn't afford it. I was going to school, I was doing all these other things. Life got in the way. So I put it in the car, but I couldn't bracket race with it. It wasn't consistent enough, and I wasn't that good a driver. And so I just bebopped around the street and had a good time with it. Maybe did some racing, on the street, blah, blah, blah. But long story short is, it wasn't until the whole drag and drive thing, and I finally went to my first drag and drive event, that I had found what I really wanted to do with my car. And it encompassed everything. It encompassed the drag racing bit, the driving bit, which I'd like to do, working on the car, and then include all things such as time management, and then of course the adrenaline rush. And that is the reason why I work on my car today. That whole entire experience is so overwhelming and such a it's amazing. And so that really is the drive for me, that I work on my car today, because of these types of events and being involved in them. There's no doubt about it.
That sums it up for me too, I think. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Am I going into fifth, Rich?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Wide open throttle, no clutch.
That's right. Top gear. Boom. What, in your opinion, is the secret to stick shift racing?
So I've mentioned the word a couple of times. It's perseverance. There's nothing more rewarding than racing your car with a stick shift. But unfortunately it requires constant work, maintenance. We go back to that super stock article in Hot Rod Magazine, and Jimmy Daniels talking about, I'll never get rid of my G-Force 4-speed. He says, I used to be able to get, I think he said 50 runs out of a set of valve springs, and now I replace them after 10. It's brutal. It's hair raising. It's exhilarating. It's thrilling. It's a damn money pit. But there's absolutely nothing more rewarding, when you get the accolades of your fellow competitor, that, man, I cannot believe you're rowing a stick shift in that car. And I really do think that's the nicest thing anybody could ever say to anybody. It really is an amazing experience to race a stick shift car. And that's why I do it. The perseverance and, just enjoying every facet of it.
I would agree yet again, Andy.
Yeah. Really, it's a passion. It's a passion. It really is. It's a passion, and if you're afraid to fall down, put an automatic in the car.
Yeah.
If you're afraid to fall down, put an automatic in the car.
Yeah,
we could, this whole conversation tonight could have been like, yeah, man, I just changed the stator and the converter, picked up another 3,060 foot. It was all good. And that'd be it.
And I have a beautiful, beautiful purse in the back seat you can all look at.
But yeah, no, there's definitely some passion involved when it comes to stick shift, and the perseverance, I think, is that, and a good clutch is stick racing.
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't know how this one works. Like, if you take it from fifth and you jam it down, what happens?
That's reverse. And so
that's race. That's race, actually. That would be sixth gear.
There used to be a time where we had a separate reverse lever for like the Jericho and what have you. So when I got this GF5R and I'm looking at this thing, it's like, where's the reverse lever? Well, there is none. So sixth gear, all right, when you pull it back, that's reverse.
Okay, well, don't do that.
And let me tell you, it tells you right away when you're looking for another gear driving down the highway, thinking you have another one left. It tells you right away that you shouldn't be doing that stunt. So when I took the drain plug out of the transmission to change the first gear, and I'm looking at these small little metal shavings in it, it was because I'm trying to find sixth gear in a 5-speed transmission because you're not paying attention. So yeah, I'm guilty of it. You betcha.
Okay, well, now you're riding with Bill and I, and we're going from fifth straight down into sixth. So the last
I am so happy for you guys, but I'll never get rid of my GF5R. You'll have to pry it out with my cold dead hands.
I think Frank would say the same thing. So maybe it's Frank. He has clicked his gear benders.
Yeah, I'm due for one of those too. That would be a great idea, actually.
Yeah. So last question: what advice would you give to somebody getting into this sport?
That is the sixth gear question. Just so
that's the sixth gear. Oh wow. Okay, there you go.
That's where we're going with all this.
Hey, the only advice I have is really to follow your heart. There's so many ways to go drag racing. Whether you want to do drag and drive, whether you want to do the stick shift thing, fuel injection, carbureted, who cares? I don't care if you race a Ford, a Mopar, a Toyota. Come and have fun. And the long and short of it is that we need a younger group of audience to join us. And if we take a quick look and take a look at the excitement that events such as Drag and Drive have produced, and let's tip our hat to Street Outlaws, for an example, and how they have enticed a whole new generation of racers. Really, that's really what we need. So, come join us. The water's warm. Jump in with both feet. Everybody's willing to help you, and just enjoy all the camaraderie that the drag racing community has to offer. And that's the best advice I can give you.
That's awesome, Andy.
Yeah.
So let me put a huge thanks out to Stick Shift Nation for hosting the podcast, and Travis for all his wizardry behind the scenes.
Thank you, Travis.
Yes. And you of course can find the Clutch Burners podcast on all the podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you'd like to see this continue, which we're going to, but you can help support it by heading over to stickracing.com, grab a Stick Shift Nation shirt, hat, or sticker. And of course, you can get Clutch Burner shirts too if you want to
like that.
Really.
Hey,
Dude, look at that. Yes, like one of those right there.
That's right. That's how you do it, folks.
We're doing great. Thanks. So, yeah, and then go ahead and plug your company one more time, Andy, please.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, yeah, if I can help you with any of your EFI stuff, I Starr Performance and Consulting. Find us on Facebook. Find us on the web. We're always happy to help. Fast, Holly, big stuff, especially Drag and Drive, or if you're in the IR, supercharged, that's really our go-to. By all means, feel free to reach us at any time. And I guess the website is or the email starperformancetuning@gmail.com.
Nice.
So, yeah,
nice.
Absolutely. Love to help you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andy.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
So don't hang up.
Thank you again for having me. It was awesome.
You're so welcome. So welcome. So don't hang up, but we will conclude this episode right there. Boom.